I love Burn the Haystack because I'm a deep thinker and I like to challenge old traditions to make way for a brighter future. That's also why I chose to get my degree from Avondale University College. With a thriving community of believers, I was able to kickstart my career and grow my faith at the same time. Business, arts, teaching, nursing, or ministry. Called to make a difference? Called to be at Avondale.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm tuning in from my parents' house in Lake Macquarie, New South Wales. Currently hiding from the COVID in Sydney, where my husband is by himself. So, poor husband.
Poor husband.
But I'm ready. Josh Wood, where are you from?
I'm Josh Wood and I'm from the somewhat unlocked down Melbourne from coronavirus.
Only somewhat.
And we can now have 30 people over for Christmas lunch.
Whoa,
Congratulations. Awesome. Good feeling. Jesse Herford, where are you from?
Yes, I am Jesse Herford. I'm from Palmerston North, New Zealand.
Is that your Kiwi accent?
It's a very bad one.
It's a horrible one.
It's a absolutely stink Kiwi accent. Nah.
Stop. You're going to get so much hate.
Our poor Kiwis.
Oh, man. Well, as much as it is probably uncalled for, I get it all the time from my Kiwi friends, so this is my revenge. Nah, it's all good.
They tease you, do they? Yeah,
Stutters, where are you from?
I am watching and engaging from Hamilton, New Zealand in my church office.
Your Christmassy church office.
Yes, my fairy lights and lamp to get a vibe. Gotta have a relaxing office vibe.
Gotta love the vibes.
Yep.
Love it.
Cool. Well, everyone, we are here just reflecting because if you haven't heard the latest announcement, we are going on a bit of a Burn the Haystack hiatus in pretty much after this, actually. This is the last episode for the year. And so after this, we won't be picking up the schedule like we normally would in February, but we will be, just taking a little bit of a break. We've been doing pretty much a weekly episode. Yeah, pretty much for 3 years straight. We have a couple of months break in there, but pretty much non-stop for the 3 years, and it's been a really big journey. And so, Jesse and I decided that it was good to just take a bit of a break, take a bit of a breather, make sure we can set the tone for where we want to go next with the podcast. So we're not exactly sure when it'll pick back up or what it will look like. We might just do a couple of sporadic episodes in the meantime if we feel like we've got something to say. We don't want to say we won't do anything. But we'll just won't be picking up the weekly schedule. I guess the episodes will be a bit sporadic until we decide on what's next for us. Also because I'm moving to Australia, I'm moving to Sydney. So, me and Laura that means this will be the first time that the podcast will be predominantly Australian based. So crazy times ahead.
So when you tune in next time, it'll be Welcome to Burn the Haystack with Josh and Laura.
Yeah.
True. That's true.
Hanging out. I'm sure it's sad to leave New Zealand, but I have some great cafes in Sydney that I can show you. So it'll be fun.
Thank you, Laura.
No worries.
And it is really sad, but I don't know. Like, I love my church here and everything. It is sad to leave, but we know, like, with everything that's happened, it'd be awesome to be closer to our family, and I'm really excited about the opportunity that I've got for Sydney next year. Yeah, as a family too. Really exciting ministry there. So all really cool things ahead, but also sad to leave. But that's just how things are, I guess.
Yeah.
So for this episode, what we wanted to do, it's like a, I don't know, what this would be in a book. It'd be like at the end of a chapter, maybe. Not the end of the book, just the end of a chapter or a section, an act.
Summary.
Yeah. It's like the closing of Act 4 and going into Act 5 or whatever is the fourth season. So this is kind of like the fourth act in Burn the Haystack's journey. So it's like, I don't know, or maybe it's like the cliffhanger before the sequel.
Before the sequel. Ooh.
Right. I was thinking more like we've been producing weekly episodes for like 3 years, and there's been 2 months in that 3 years where we've had a break. So there's been 8 weeks off in 3 years. And when you're kind of churning content out at that really fast rate, you don't often have time to sit and reflect and see what we've grown. But really, there's been quite a huge community following us on our social media channels, and we get a lot of feedback about all the episodes. And I know lots of people have talked to me even about the kind of things they've learned from each episode, or what they loved, or what changed their mind, or really questioned their own theology. So I think it's important to just take a look at what we've done, feel proud of this baby that's turned into so much bigger than anyone thought it would.
That's true.
Reflecting.
Yeah. Like, we've covered a lot of ground, like both theologically, ministry-wise, practically, leadership, discipleship, all those things. Yeah, covered a lot of ground. So it's going to be good to have some time to sit and think about where to go next.
Totally.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. So I'm excited. I don't exactly know what the future holds, but that's kind of the point of it. So anyway, what we thought we'd do today is just do a bit of a reflection on the things we as a team have learnt over doing 3 years of Burn the Haystack. And hey, we would love it if you drop it in the comments, maybe things that you've learnt from any episode or from anything, any of our social posts or things in the community. We'd love to hear from you guys as well, because we are live, so we can engage with the chat. So if you have things that have impacted you from the podcast over the course of our history, we'd love to hear from you. So drop a comment, drop a like, whatever you got to do. It'd be great. So what we have prepared now is, I guess, going around the circle. What is this? Round the
The
grid.
Zoom square. Yeah.
The Zoom square.
Yeah. I don't know. How do you word this?
I don't know.
Around the group. And we're going to share. We've each got sort of like a favorite couple of episodes. Maybe not necessarily favorite, because Jesse and I aren't allowed to have favorite children, right? So we're going to.
Well,
all
Josh,
our
you do have a
favourites.
favorite child.
Well, yeah, true. I have a favorite child, but I mean,
By default, because you only have one child
yes.
right now. Yes.
Yeah.
But in terms of our episode children, I can't have a favorite. They're all special.
Aw.
Except for that one that we
Except
don't
Jedi and
talk
Drunk
about.
Pigeon. That's not. That can go and sit in a corner for a little while.
No.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I don't remember what the Jedi and Pigeons episode is even about.
That's funny.
And the
We
request
had-
is, Laura, after this, please don't go and listen to it.
Okay, right.
Yes.
I wasn't.
That's why it's infamous, because it's just so far left field that everyone's like, what?
Yeah. It was
much.
it was surprisingly far of left field, because I remember when we had this conversation of, should we talk about Star Wars? Star Wars has just come out, and we're like, what about faith and culture? Let's talk about pop culture. People will like that, and people didn't.
Did you get negative feedback from it?
No, we got
Was it
no
the-
feedback at all. Which
Oh,
is-
Was
no.
it the people
None.
didn't like it, or you actually, on reflection, went, what on earth were we thinking?
Yeah, more of that option. So we're going to go around and talk about some episodes today that have been a big highlight for us, and just have been a learning moment for us. And so again, if you guys have anything, leave it in the comments so we can share and talk about that too. But maybe Jesse, do you want to start off?
Certainly. The only black-clothed person in the chat. All right,
All Blacks, right?
All Blacks.
Because you're
Absolutely.
in New Zealand.
In New
Symbolic
Zealand,
of the last remaining Kiwi.
the one Southern Hemisphere footy team to be proud of. Nah, jokes. I love the Wallabies sometimes. All right, so
That's not real football, but that's a whole other conversation.
okay. All right.
Oh.
Rugby.
Anyway.
Rugby. Sorry. Not the real football. The real football, as my father-in-law would say. The world game. All right. Anyway, what am I talking about?
Jesse, what's your favorite episode?
Hey, that's a good
Please.
question. Let me answer it right now.
Yes.
My favorite episode. Here's one that I really loved. Not because I especially thought it was fantastic, but because of what it actually meant for us at the time, and that is episode number 22, Digital Discipleship Conference 2018, 2nd of August 2018. Obviously, And the reason why I love this episode so much was because it was the first time where Josh and I really felt like we were part of something bigger than ourselves. Not like, oh, we have a podcast that some people outside of New Zealand and Australia maybe listen to. Like that was one thing to actually come to grips with the fact that we were talking and people who we will never meet might listen to us and might find some value in it. But Digital Discipleship Conference was where we really began to be aware of the fact that we were sort of a little fish in a big pond, a bigger pond than we had realized previously, that there was this growing Adventist content creator community that was really embracing so many different creative things and going in different directions and doing really exciting projects, and feeling like we were part of that, like a contributor, was super cool. So big highlight for me.
Yeah,
Totally.
that was an
That's
interesting.
awesome.
That was a
You
big
guys-
shift in the podcast, I think. What were you guys saying, sorry?
You guys actually presented at that Digital Discipleship Conference. Was that 2018 or 2019?
2019.
We sort of presented. It was like a ideas. What was it called? The Ideathon.
Ideathon.
Yeah. So we were just one of the people in the Ideathon. There was heaps.
But we were a bit different than a lot of those people because the Ideathon was really around things that you were thinking about or an idea that you wanted to launch. And we were like, okay,
Oh, we've done this.
we've already
Yeah.
launched it, so what now? You know, sort of thing. So,
And Laura, you also had a digital discipleship connection as well.
I think I was at that Digital Discipleship Conference. And I was going to
Yeah.
say, I remember that. And I remember, because got super into podcasts. I've always been like a podcast junkie for a good 5 years now. And when you guys launched, I was like, oh my gosh, like an Adventist Australian podcast. This is so new. And when I got to that Digital Discipleship Conference with the Ideathon, I was like, wow, there's actually lots of people doing this or similar, like YouTube or podcast Adventist message.
yeah.
So I don't know if Burn the Haystack was maybe if pioneering is too much of a big word, but it really
No.
was one of the first in Australia. And within that first 12 months, there were so many others launched.
yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
a cool culture shift.
Being in the podcasting sphere has really opened my eyes to many, many more people that have gone before. Like we talked to Nathan Brown a few weeks ago, and he was sharing with Josh and I that they used to run a podcast years and years ago with Signs, and never heard of it, but clearly gave way to, and even at Digital Discipleship Conference meeting Matt Lucio, who Adventist History Podcast has been around for a lot longer than we have, and many, many others. So if there was a pioneer, it's definitely like Nathan Brown, Matt Lucio, those sorts of guys.
Even Oz Table Talk started before us, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they had a very sporadic release schedule before that. After that, they picked up a weekly one.
I think we were super lucky that we had each other early on, Josh, to kind of motivate each other. Because I think if we had not really had that, it would have been the same.
Thank you. I'm
But
doing
being
a love heart with my hands. So cute. Bromance.
But being able to motivate ourselves to get into a good schedule, I think was really beneficial for us early on, because it meant that we got to learn at a lot more quicker rate than we would have if we were just kind of flailing around releasing an episode 1 month and then going 3 months without releasing another episode, and
It's like
many
that
other
accountability of going to the gym. It's always easier when you've got someone with you because they're relying on you, type of thing.
yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. All right, who's next, Laura?
Yep, I'll go next. All right. So the one I was going to talk about first is an episode called What is My Purpose? And it was from a while ago. I want to say at least a year or so ago. And I thought it was really funny because I did a top 10, my top favorite episodes of the last 3 years in our Burn the Haystack community Facebook group recently. And when I shared it, and Josh Stothers said to me, he's like, what? I didn't even remember that. And I was like, are you serious? It changed my life. How did you not remember? And anyway, we both, I think, went back and listened to it. But the What is My Purpose episode kind of talked about how this modern Christianity, following the culture of changing from very much a groupthink collective to a westernized individualistic mindset. And we as individuals sometimes are like, God, what is my purpose? Like, is your purpose for me to, get this role in marketing, become a manager, be the best I can be? Or is it for me to fly to Africa, start an orphanage, like adopt 20 children and preach the word? Or, everyone wants like a really specific purpose. And what they mean by purpose in a modern context is life plan. Like, and they're sort of almost thinking of God as like, a magic 8-ball that you can just be like, what should I do next? Show me the path. And I always have felt like, I don't know if God really minds what path you take. Like if you have 2 job offers, is there a right and wrong one to accept? He will kind of work with whatever you choose. But I had to wrestle with that to get to that conclusion. And so many people in my life are like, what is the thing? I once helped a friend and she was like purchasing a home, and she was like, I just praying that God will choose the suburb. What suburb would we be best in? And I was like, I don't know if God cares. Like maybe cares is the wrong word. But of course he cares. But it's not detrimental, and it's not affecting your purpose. Quotation marks purpose.
Your perfect plan.
Yeah, that's right. I caught up with my nana this weekend, and she was telling me that her faith does wonders, because when she goes to the shop, she says a special prayer that she will find a good parking spot, and she always does, and it's her faith that gets her that.
Aww.
And I was like, Nana, that's cute, but also I don't know if God is that kind of like magical, lucky charm that gets you a good parking spot. Anyway, so this What is My Purpose episode, you talked about Jeremiah 29:11, and Josh Stothers, I think, said something about, you go to a classic Christian Karen's house and there's Jeremiah 29:11 on the wall. But if you actually read the story behind that verse, it's God saying to a mass group, be like, my purpose for you is to love one another and spread like goodness. It's not about what suburb should you live in, or I hope you find a good parking spot, or maybe you should take that role in marketing or whatever. And that just like blew my mind. That was a long discussion, but thanks for that episode. I appreciated it.
Yeah, it was funny after you were saying like how much you loved it and explaining it to me. I was honestly trying to remember what we talked about, and so I went back and listened to the episode, and I was like, this is a really good episode. I don't remember any of these ideas, and I ended up preaching on it like the next weekend, like the same content.
Oh, good.
So funny. But I was like, oh man, like this is actually like right where my church is at right now. Like I'm hearing discussions. Like, yeah, it's funny.
I really like, Laura, how you like brought in the fact that we have this hyper individualistic mentality, which is so countercultural to the narrative the Bible gives us.
So like, countercultural.
God is always talking about his kingdom, his community, his people, not his, Laura, you are my one and only selected remnant child, and
that's right.
I will only ever do what you want. But then the question is God or is God your genie?
Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah. And I don't think God minds what suburb I build my house in.
Yeah. I find it funny how we have this whole idea of, God's a God that gives you freedom of choice. And isn't that an amazing value? And then on the other hand, but God also has something very specific in mind for you. And if you don't choose it, your entire life quest is over before it's even started, sort of thing. Like that's
that whole
such
idea
a
of
ridiculous thing.
Who's the one partner for you? It's like, well, if you stuff up picking your partner, then everyone else in the world is stuffed up as well, essentially.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah. And the difference, I think it's important for us to separate purpose from plan, like from life plan. Like if I have a purpose for you, or, I have a plan for you, says the Lord, it's basically like a plan as in a goal for you to achieve of how to grow and be a good person, not so much a plan of like what life path you should go down, how many children you should have, those kind of things that I would think about are my big milestone life decisions. That's not a purpose. It's an attitude thing. Yeah.
that has been a pretty constant actual, like now that I think about it, it's been a lot. We've had a lot of conversations about reading the Bible communally more than individually. Kind of been a little thing that's threaded through a lot of episodes actually, like looking
As well
back.
as just reading the Bible in context.
True. Yeah.
No proof texting, guys.
Yeah.
Well, that's it though,
Helpful.
isn't it? It's like reading the Bible as faithfully to the original intent as possible, which is to read it with a group mentality. A communist group no, not a communist.
Look out,
But-
we're going to get in trouble. That was a joke.
But that's what we think of when we think of, like, we divide these sorts of discussions into dualistic left versus right, you know, sort of capitalist, communist, sort of right and left sort of thing. And so if you're not one, you're the other. And yet we have this hyper individualistic society, which is all about personal fulfillment.
But why do
and-
we think that God has to operate within our constructs? Like, why do you have to be left or right? Why do you have to be capitalist or communist? Why can't you just be God's chosen people? And that's a whole other category.
Yeah.
Mm.
Humans
kingdom within
like
a
two
kingdom.
categories. We love binaries as humans. And we
Yeah.
also love to stay within our own brain. It goes against our nature to get outside of our head and be like, what could it be like from a different perspective?
Yeah.
People would rather drag God down into their specific box
Yeah.
than let him be and watch him go past. Anyway,
Speaking of binary,
stutters.
my episode that I'll go to is,
Yep.
and I don't mean this in any derogatory sense, but Andre Afamasanga being gay and a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This whole idea in Christian thought that there is only that kind of binary male and female relationship type thing. I don't know whether you guys like in NZ, do you guys have ABC TV iView?
No.
No, we don't.
So
No.
there's a show on the ABC. I know I'm going to sound like such an old grandpa saying this, but it's called You Can't Ask That.
My
Wow.
favorite show.
Oh,
It's
I've seen
so
that. I've seen
good.
that before. Yeah.
Does that-
And
Really
they did
good.
one on intersex people.
Okay.
And it's just like people who are born without like the binary male or female DNA, or they're, for warning for those who perhaps like don't want to listen to this, but their genitalia is not distinctly male or female.
Right.
And it's this idea that gender is not as binary as we have made it out to be, even from a biological perspective. And I think Andre's episode around being gay and a follower of Jesus opens up this whole other conversation that the church will need to have and does need to have around the faith of individuals who don't fit into the box of sexuality that we've created. And I think it really shows the damage that the church has done to faithful Jesus followers who are struggling to come to terms with their sexuality because of the judgment and shame and all of that kind of stuff that comes with being who they honestly and wholeheartedly believe God has created them to be, and who I honestly and wholeheartedly believe God has created them to be. And it's just one of those items of how much blood do we as Christians have on our hands for the way that we've treated this community? And I think Andre really presented the real compassionate personal battle that he himself had, that countless others have had, that the church thinks is, it's just people over there. But each of us know Andre in one way, shape or form. And when it's personalized to someone that you know, I think it becomes a different story. And it's that idea of, let's stop talking about them and start talking with them.
Yeah, pass the mic. I loved his quote about passing the mic and hearing from someone who is part of the queer community or the rainbow community. And it's so important. I think the latest statistic that I heard was 1 in every 12 people is a queer person, someone who identifies within the LGBT.
1 in 12,
QI.
really?
Yes, and the reason I always remember that statistic is the person who told it to me was like, technically that's one of the disciples.
Whoa. Really?
And they were sort of like joking, but I was like, because we were talking about, acceptance in the church and stuff. But yeah, 1 in 12, and somewhere on the queer rainbow spectrum, as Andre called it. And so it's so important to think of, and also the intersex people are as common in Australia to have that not quite one or the other genitalia when you're born, is the same level of commonality as redheads being born with naturally red hair. Yeah, wow. Which is, surprisingly common, but we obviously don't see it because it's under their clothes. And they will deal with that. But we don't know the secret battles that anyone is facing. And so it's just so important to lean away from being like, that person is other with a capital O and other equals bad, It's important to keep challenging
we put
ourselves.
up these walls rather than building bridges. And it's like, God, in Matthew, just to be really generic, it's that whole idea of go and make disciples of all nations, not just go and make disciples of people that think like you, smell like you, speak like you, dress like you. It's of all people. Why do we make it exclusive to just the people that we're comfortable with?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
It's just human nature. That's why it's so important. I think episodes like that on the Burn the Haystack have been really important. Like, I'm sure it was not just Andre, but to just get different perspectives, to stop thinking just everyone who's like me is who I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
No, great episode, Andre. He's amazing.
He is. It always makes me think of that quote by, I want to say it was Rachel Held Evans, who said that for so many years her quest was to make gay people straight, when she realized that her actual quest, what we should be doing, is to help making gay people Christians. So
yeah. Yes.
It seems so obvious, but anyway, yeah.
No, it was a big conversation and so helpful. Like, Andre's just so precise and well spoken too, but he's also like we said, he's a friend too. So it's like, I don't know, amazing just to hear that point of view and help me to understand. I guess, like, I'm still trying to
process a lot of what he said.
Yeah, I'm still trying to make sense of the whole thing, really. And I don't know, I probably need many more conversations, but I'm sure it's helped a lot of people too.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well.
Your turn.
Yeah. I don't know. I wrote down like a list, but yeah. For me, randomly, one of my favorites it was just the first one I noted. I don't know if I went through all the episodes, maybe this wouldn't be the one that I would have chosen, but like both of the Spooktober specials, the episodes we did around Halloween, mainly because I like the idea of making, like, even though I don't necessarily, like, we've talked about Halloween and all that sort of stuff, and we talked about it as a holiday, but I think I just like the idea of trying to approach it differently than how so many Adventists that I've seen, at least in Australia and New Zealand, have approached it in the past.
Yeah.
Like, I remember this Facebook post once, I think I might have shared this on one of the episodes, I can't remember, of just like this lady laughing because she just bought all this, like, I think it was bananas, and then just wrote like in like permanent marker like Bible verses on them for trick-or-treaters when they come. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like I get it, it's cool that you're handing out free fruit and whatever, but you're doing it with like malice. And you do, like, what they're gonna think is they're gonna see a Bible verse and be given a banana, and they're gonna think, oh, so this is what Christians have to offer. Everybody else is giving me
Christians are just monkeys.
Oh, true. Maybe that's what they would see. I don't know. But like, to me, that they're gonna think that person down the road with all the spooky Halloween stuff, they're giving me amazing massive chocolate bars for free and being super generous, and then the Christian who put these Bible verse on these bananas for me that, you can get a bunch of them for $2 or whatever. I don't know.
It's a bit
like,
grinchy.
For me, I don't like the idea of like running, like, and I'm not saying we should celebrate Halloween and everything, obviously, but like, I just like the idea of trying to reframe how we do it in a way that's more helpful. And I think that's what those episodes, at least for me, did. Found something special I can do on that time. Yeah.
Not just that, it's kind of like redeeming a sort of liturgical practice that many people have found very spiritually beneficial for centuries, and people in our faith tradition and many others we just don't get that anymore. So that's
I think
cool.
The other thing with those episodes was that for you guys at least, it forced you to just pause and reflect on the saints of your past that have influenced you to who you are today. And I wonder how often we actually do that ourselves. I recall when I was growing up, people would often do this little game test thing with you, and it's like, name the 10 richest people in the world, and you'd be lucky if you got 2.
Yeah.
But then they'd be like, now name the 10 most influential people in your life. And it's like the names and the stories behind those are so much more meaningful than just, that person has heaps of money. It's what has that person actually invested in your life? And I think that was a really cool kind of twist on the All Saints kind of Eve type aspect that you looked at.
Well, yeah, we don't have anything in the Adventist calendar, or at least I say the Adventist calendar like we have a calendar. Well, we do have a calendar, but it's, you know what I mean? But like in our Adventist like liturgy and traditions, we don't have anything to look back on previous people in our church and in our faith life who've been influential on us. We don't have anything at all, like not in the Sabbath schools, not in our preaching calendar, not in anything we celebrate. So for me, I'm hoping that those episodes can continue to lead to some sort of culture change with it.
Imagine if, like, for the next 10 years, the preaching that you have at your church is always on that weekend, just pausing and reflecting on like 2 or 3 influential people either in your life or in your church's community over the last 10 or 20 years. How special would that be?
That would be pretty cool. I should have done that this year. Next year.
And also the music that Josh composed for those episodes. I always love it when I can play that theme song. It's great.
Actually, yeah, hands down, one of my favorite things of this whole last 3 years has been the theme song, bopping to the theme song. And then when there's like a special edition theme song, it's like, woo! It's fun.
Good times.
Yeah, I like it. I appreciate your effort and your musical skills, Josh. Very good.
So just before Jesse heads into another favourite episode, if you're watching along, and we've got a few of you watching along, make sure you pop in if you do some reflection, your kind of favourite episode, even of the last 3 years. It may be really difficult to find one favourite episode. That's okay. Even the 4 of us had to scroll back through the back catalogue because we realised there's quite a few of them, and we tried to limit it, but we couldn't even do that. So throw yours in. We'd love to see what you guys as listeners and watchers of Burn the Haystack have enjoyed listening and watching over the past 3 years too.
Very cool. Yes, so my next favourite episode, I thought I would pick some ones that maybe are a little bit more obscure. And the next one that I picked was how church must change if it's going to survive the 21st century. Just trying to find it as I scroll through.
That would have been like episode 30 something, I reckon.
Was it, or was it in 2019?
Nah, 2019 sometime, I reckon. Yeah.
I reckon it was 2019 at some point.
Yeah.
I want to say like March or April. May 8th, 2019. Episode number 60. So there you go.
I was only halfway there.
You were halfway there. Living on a prayer. All right. So I love this episode. Because it was, for us, we have talked a lot on this podcast about the whole idea of redesigning church to meet the needs of the current culture, to meet the needs of modern people, and to be able to share Jesus in a more relevant way. And it seems like a trite sort of thing that a bunch of millennials talking about how much, the old way of church kind of sucks and we need to do different. We need to do things different, man. The old ways. And anyway, all right. But this is live. It's great. No, but this episode was cool because it was an actual case study of how somebody in the US, a church in the US, is doing amazing things in actually redesigning church in a really exciting way. Buying this big plot of land in a rural area, designing their entire church experience to meet the needs of their local community more than just the Sunday or the Saturday service sort of thing. And it was really inspiring. And actually, we didn't follow up on this, but the pastor or one of the church leaders ended up reaching out to us and saying, hey, thanks for featuring our story on the podcast, we should chat
Oh,
a little bit
that's
later
nice.
on. I believe that happened. It could just be my overactive imagination.
No,
but-
they did. Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah. And
we-
I said we'd touch base in a year or so, but then obviously this year has been very distracting.
I
Well,
do
yes.
wonder how they're going given COVID year. So-
Yeah.
At the same time, what a great kind of prophetic episode as people talk about what is the new normal in church life.
Yeah.
And a lot of churches, church boards and pastors are thinking, well, what could church look like moving forward? Because things may not be as effective the way that they were. And so I think that I know I've been reflecting on that episode myself recently, and the concepts around kind of the facilities we have as a church that are so often just our facilities.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what would it look like if in your hall, like your church hall, you open it up every Sunday and there's this like wall of like washers and dryers, and you just invite all of the homeless people or people without washers and dryers into your community to come and wash and dry their clothes, and it doesn't cost them like at a laundromat.
Mm.
Wow.
Definitely. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, I think that's the thing. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from still reaching out, because it's the kind of thing that I'd want to see. Like even if we did it 2 years from when we did the episode, like the way they do it might have totally shifted. But yeah, definitely a very. I totally agree with you saying, Josh. Like it's kind of more relevant now than ever, particularly with. I don't want this whole conversation to become about COVID again, because we've talked about that enough, and everybody's
Yeah.
talked about it all the time, all year. But I think now a lot of churches are struggling with, in our specific church structure, a lot of local churches are struggling with like local expenses and that kind of thing, just with the way our finances are structured. And so this kind of model really offers something different, and would have been really effective in bouncing back after something like COVID. And there could be any number of things that could happen that could knock us out of a church building for a while.
But even
that
the
would do
idea
same
that
things.
a financial model, and this is again the countercultural thing of the kingdom, the better financial model of church perhaps is to actually spend money for no real return on investment, but just for the sake of bettering your community and showing the love of Jesus. You may see nothing from it, but hey, that's ministry to some extent. Great if you get people coming to church, but how about we just kind of care for people as a starting point?
And that's like the whole message of Jesus's parable about the dishonest, what is it, money steward or whatever. Like it's use the gifts and the talents and the resources that you have to impact people for God's kingdom. Yeah. I think the other reason why I've been really I have personally been really excited by stuff like that is because of how my mind has been changing around this idea of like the Garden of Eden and temple, and this whole idea of being a caretaker, being a faithful steward over even just something like the land, making the land a place where heaven and earth can intersect. And there's beauty and there's artistry in that, and there's
so
spirituality.
powerful.
Yeah, it's practical as well. If it's actually impacting people's lives in a positive way and it's helping to shape them and change them into that new creation, then man, that's such a rich thing.
Rich.
Yeah, so rich. I'm glad that you chose that episode, because I feel like, as much as we kind of mocked at the start, like the millennials that are just like,
Just complaining.
Just complaining. And I think there is a lot of that talk, because there's such a cultural difference between my generation and my grandparents' generation, who are, by and large, the people running our Adventist churches right now. There's a lot of dissonance there. And so the young people are like, obviously going to complain and be like, this has no relevance to our everyday lives and cultures. We should shake things up. But then to actually discuss it in the podcast format in the way that you guys do, it felt like a helpful and practical discussion, where it was like, we're not just being like, oh, it needs to change because of these reasons. It's actually like, oh, here are some ways we could change. This is what we could implement. And like, yeah. So that was
I'd just probably
healthy
say,
discussion.
it's not so much about the relevance, because that can often be seen as a dirty word, but it's about the meaningfulness.
I didn't know.
Like the structure of church and how church is run now might be meaningful for your grandparents' generation.
Extremely
but are they
so.
communicating the meaningfulness to this generation in a way that you go, that's why we do that? And if we're not communicating that, of course there's going to be conversation around this is not relevant, this is not meaningful. Can we do things differently?
Well, that makes sense. It does.
It's good. It's
Yeah,
good.
great episode. Is it my turn again?
Yes.
All right, so my second episode is that I've chosen is called The Sunday That Cried Wolf. And that was a really recent one, actually, which talked about the Sunday law. And I've recommended that to lots of people, including people who don't ever listen to Burn the Haystack. I'm like, you must listen to this. If you don't want the banter, skip to 6 minutes and 30 seconds. And I know that off by heart right now because I have recommended it to that many people.
That's so funny.
I know. Because, of course, the banter's great if you know you guys and are regular listeners, but maybe these people just wanted to get straight to the chat.
Some
Anyway,
people
and
are
you
like that.
talk about the Sunday law, and I'm just steering clear of the word relevance now that I've learned that it's a dirty word 30 seconds ago.
No, feel free to say it. Feel free to say it.
Just be you,
Thanks
Laura.
for permission.
Yeah, we're all friends here.
Oh, thanks, guys. Anyways, talking about the Sunday law and that kind of really niche corner of prophecy that's about really specific laws that politicians are going to try and introduce and how that's going to affect Adventists and what they need to do in that time and stuff, a lot of which comes from the writings of Ellen White. And that kind of stuff I've always felt quite jaded towards because I'm like, it seemed a little bit conspiracy theorist to me. But the more I thought about it, so I just never let myself dwell on it because I was like, this makes me uncomfortable because it seems improbable. But particularly before listening to so many Burn the Haystack podcasts, I really believed this message I had been taught growing up in the Adventist church that this is what we believe in this box. If you do not fit this box, it's dangerous if you don't believe the exact beliefs that we do. I was taught it was extremely dangerous to not believe in creation, for example, that one day, the 7 days of creation, 6 days, whatever, were 24-hour blocks of time. And I remember a whole Bible study on that. And I was like, what purpose did that have? And also for people who have those alternate, maybe non-Adventist kind of beliefs that the days are 1,000 years to God and it could have happened over multiple days or whatever, they were really dangerous. Don't befriend those people. Don't talk to them about it. That's the devil's work. Where was I going with this? Oh, yes, back to the Sunday law. So with that mindset of things being must fit in a box, I was scared to question my own belief about the Sunday law because I felt uncomfortable with it. But I was like, if I don't believe it and agree with the elders of my church, what does that mean for the whole rest of my faith? So listening to Burn the Haystack as a whole has made me feel comfortable to think about, question, discuss, have doubts, air those doubts without completely losing a faith, which has been a lifesaver for me.
So can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
And this is more broadly, we haven't discussed this prior to this, but is Adventist theology in some respects this house of cards where if one card is taken away or one belief is slightly different, then you're completely out of the fold, your whole faith kind of is turned upside down, you don't have that community anymore, and oftentimes your identity, if you've grown up in the church, is I am an Adventist and these are my people. But if you have that alternate belief, suddenly you don't have those people anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
Do you know what? According to my grandparents, yes. So according to me, at 26, after many years of, I want to say deconstruction and questioning my own beliefs, burning haystacks and finding the needle of goodness in them, I don't think that. I think I can have that we are all made unique and can have different interpretations and still love and be loved by God just the same. but definitely in some of the more conservative circles that I walked in as a child and a teenager, for sure, it was dangerous to not believe, and that's how you unravel, and that's how the devil lures you down an alternative path, and, you know, maybe you become even Pentecostals sometimes by those really conservative groups were like a...
Speaking of dirty words.
Right. And I'm just like, some of the best people I know that I work with now in workplaces are Pentecostal Christians, and so kind and loving. And to
Which
think
is actually
that
a
they
biblical
have it
term,
wrong and
people.
are dangerous is baffling to me. But when I was in this bubble growing up, they were other, they were different, they had it wrong, and they were dangerous. And that, I think is a really toxic strain that can run through our churches if we don't catch it and question it. Anyway, I've just rambled for a long time, but The Sunday That Cried Wolf is a great episode. Everyone should listen. 6 minutes and 30 seconds is when serious chat starts.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the danger Adventism has gotten itself into in the past, when we've painted any other idea as dangerous. Because I don't think that's conducive or helpful to the journey of what got us here. Because if we thought that from this, like if way back in, 1844 and all that, when we were first, and Jesus didn't come, the great disappointment, if we had just, like the pioneers back then had just retracted to their original beliefs and thought, well, everything else is dangerous, I'm just going to go straight back to being a classic Methodist or a classic... I don't know what else was around. I can't remember anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like if they just went straight back to those old beliefs, because, well, clearly that's all wrong and all dangerous. But instead what they did is opened their eyes and looked around and thought, well, we've got something wrong, but there's definitely something right in this. Let's keep looking and let's just open up and think, like if we were just going to let the Bible transform us and we were just going to keep it exactly how we saw, what would that look like? And I'm proud of that history, I'm not someone who's like, I don't go on and on and on about pioneers, our Adventist pioneers all the time, but I am proud of our history. And I think when you get into the territory of any other belief is dangerous, then it stops the momentum of letting the Bible transform you. Because there could always be something we've missed that we need to, I don't know, or maybe not miss, maybe misunderstood.
No, I completely agree with you, Josh, because I think that the idea that Adventists have, and this is in the preamble to our fundamental beliefs, is that we're open to this thing called progressive revelation, and furthering of the Holy Spirit, opening our eyes to new truth and this kind of thing. But if we just kind of go anything other is dangerous or wrong or of the devil, then do we really have that progressive revelation mindset? Yes, we have more knowledge today at our fingertips than has ever been available in the history of the world. But is that more knowledge or is that more information? And have we actually trained ourselves on how to analyze that information to come to an understanding of what God is telling us today rather than what God is telling us 200 years ago? And this is the idea of hermeneutics, which you guys spoke about in another episode around the idea of the Bible can't mean something outside or, its original kind of interpretation to some extent. We've got to have a look at what was the author originally intending and then extrapolate from that. We can't make it mean something it was never meant to mean.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. So good, Josh.
So many
Good work,
things.
guys.
Wow.
So,
Josh.
my
You're
next one, which is interesting given the conversation. Laura, I think you and I have tag teamed this well because you're talking about, Sunday law and, this idea of anything other is wrong and that kind of thing. My next episode is also a more recent one, which is are algorithms affecting our theology? And this idea of, do we put ourselves in this kind of windswept tunnel of the same opinions and information and limit ourselves from growing in our relationship with Jesus, our knowledge of the Bible. And I think it's really interesting. I've been reflecting on this because one of the guys that I spent some time with listens and reads a lot of Andy Stanley stuff. And I think Andy Stanley's got a lot to offer the Christian community and the Adventist church. And I've got someone else who listens to a lot of sermons by Stephen Furtick. And I think Stephen Furtick, again, has got a lot to offer, our understanding of how church can operate. But the challenge is, and this is where we've got to balance it, is that those guys are not Adventist. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying the perspective they bring to their teaching is in a very different context to the perspective that we're used to. And so we need to be able to analyze and critique the information that they give us in order to apply it in our current context. But the risk is when we say anything other is bad, we only hear the information that is right and disallow that furthering learning from the Holy Spirit. And sometimes we go down a wrong rabbit hole. Yeah, confirmation bias. And I think it's really interesting to go, if I am, researching for a sermon on Luke chapter 2, then all of my kind of Facebook feed is going to be people who might be commenting on Luke chapter 2 for a little while. And because I'm an Adventist and one of the Facebook groups that I'm in is Adventist professional ministers, then I'm going to see a lot of Adventist Luke chapter 2 stuff. And sometimes that's not the information that I need to see. Sometimes I need to see other things that challenge my thought so that I can grow spiritually.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see some we chatted about it, the idea of because we've seen all this stuff recently about algorithms and how they affect us socially and politically. And I'd love to see some good journalism or scholarly thought or some sort of more professional research into how it's actually affecting theology, because I really do think this whole age of these bite-sized sermons and that kind of thing that we're consuming, they're not bad, they're awesome. I mean, I've made a couple myself, my own Instagram page and that kind of thing, but it's almost the same as proof texting, in that it's grabbing a chunk of the Bible that works in a specific context and applying it. And again, it's a bit better than proof texting, but I don't know, because I don't know. I'm trying to work it out, but I guess I'm guessing if that's all of your devotional life or your spiritual life is made up of, is a bunch of 2-minute or 1-minute sermon chunks, you're gonna end up with this, especially from different preachers and from different theological perspectives and frameworks. I think it could end up really messy for people. You
could be quite confused.
Yeah, I've heard, I mentioned, I've heard those little 2-minute sermon clips from Stephen Furtick before. Most of them are really good, but some of them it's a nice thought, but it doesn't quite work, in my context. I'm trying to think of a specific one right now, but I just remember thinking that when I was listening to one recently. But I thought if you have enough of those and you don't actually put the time in to link it and link it with the bigger biblical picture and the bigger theological picture of God, it's going to get really confusing really fast. And so I'd be interested, as we keep progressing through this, I would love to see somebody with the skills, the money, and the time to do some proper research into this sort of thing. It'd be so cool.
Yeah.
It would be really cool. I would love to see that too.
Maybe we need to find someone. Maybe we need to sponsor it.
Yep.
Yeah. That's, okay. That's
Future of Burn the Haystack.
It's an
potentially.
idea. Bookmark that.
Yes. Save. At least somebody says save the timestamp of this.
Save.
Love it.
All right.
Love it.
Cool. Wait, anybody else have anything to say on algorithms?
Now who's next? You're up,
Beep
Josh.
boop, beep boop. Josh's turn.
It's me. I'm just really torn between two. They're both pretty early on. Okay, I'll just go with that one. Ben Reynolds loves the KJV Bible. As a pastor, it has to be one of the most helpful episodes we have ever recorded. Just Ben Reynolds, again, somebody so succinct with his words and so knowledgeable on subjects and things.
Speaking of someone to do some research, Ben Reynolds.
Ben Reynolds.
That's true. That's true.
True.
He is soon to be joining you guys in Aussie land if he hasn't already.
True, yeah. He's heading over to Perth.
He's heading over to Perth.
Yeah. Very sad for us here in
So
Kiwi land.
I have no memory of this episode. Can you give me a 30-second
such a good
explainer?
episode. So this
I'll
is
have to
this
go
is
back.
this is the experience that Josh had with your episode that you're now having
Yeah.
with Josh's episode.
Was this like
Yeah.
okay? I'm just trying to find it. Is this in the first 10 or the
Yeah.
first?
It was
like
it was
episode
very
It was
nine.
early.
I know
It
it was
was-
early.
was
Can
a
you, can you
cool
give me a
in a hotel
30-second a 30-second overview
Sure
of what
can.
it's about? Thanks.
Pretty much, you hear all these people go on about how KJV is the only Bible translation you should read. I don't know if you've heard that argument, but as a pastor, I hear
Grandparents,
people
yeah.
talk about do it all the time. That
We
whole
love you,
episode,
Laura's grandparents.
It just
I
takes
love
that
them so much.
takes that whole idea and then just kills it. It's gone. It's over. Damn. And he gives some really great, So just some really great insights into reading the Bible and understanding it.
Even the history of translations.
Right.
Which
Oh,
is super
just so good.
fascinating.
So pretty much for me, whenever somebody's like tells me they're thinking, I'm like, hey, have you listened to this before? Like, I know it's my own podcast, and I'm like, but it's a really helpful episode we did with this guy called Ben Reynolds. You should listen to it. And they'll listen to it. They're like, wow, that's some really good points. I see it differently now. My job, like, rather than me have to explain it every time, I'm just like, here you go. Here's an hour of like well done conversation.
But the
around
reality
this.
is, I could not explain it the way Ben explains it.
Me
No.
neither.
No, not at all.
I'm going to have to go back and listen.
And
You
I
are.
think Josh and I have some really good memories of recording that episode because, as he mentioned before, we were at some ministers' meetings or something like that, and we recorded it in a hotel room with really shoddy equipment and really just unsure if it was all going to work or not. But it all turned out great, and it was lovely. It was a lovely conversation.
There was like a blanket against the
I think-
wall to try and stop the sound bouncing off it and stuff. And
Because
Yeah,
we're on
we-
like the 17th floor of this hotel in the middle of Auckland. So
yeah, we put something up against the windows to try and make it quieter.
there was like a construction site
Mattress
next
off the
door.
bed
It
type of thing.
Yeah, what an
nothing.
adventure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was great.
was awesome.
And Ben was awesome about it. I think we were all sharing 1 or 2 microphones or something.
Yeah,
Those old Rode NT USB mics we had. Great mic.
great mic.
I think the beauty of Burn the Haystack over the last 3 years has been kind of the ebb and flow from like, the theologically rich episodes like the Ben Reynolds episode on the KJV, but also the super practical kind of socio-political episodes that look at, being gay and a follower of Jesus, but then also the Adventist specific theology around the Sunday law type episodes. And there's been this constant up and down so that there's kind of something for people at every part of their spiritual journey. And I think that there's a credit to, especially like you and Josh and Jesse. I was going to say you, and I wasn't speaking to anyone specifically. There's a credit to Josh and Jesse for framing that. And I don't know that it was always deliberately planned that way, but it certainly worked really well that way.
Have we deliberately planned that much?
Everything was planned to a T from the start.
Stuthers is the mastermind, just pulling all the strings. He's making it all happen. Who knew? Who knew we were experts at so many different things?
Not I.
Facilitators of discussion. That's all you
Thank
need
you.
to really.
Thank you,
Great
Pastor.
discussions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. I remember part of the reason we started it too. I think part of the reason we went beyond like the first 10 episodes as well was because like when you're at something like a pastor's like a minister's meeting or something, and Josh, you've probably experienced this too. Maybe not so much Laura, but sometimes pastors.
Laura,
have
when's the
sort of-
last time you went to a minister's meeting?
I did go to one last year because my father-in-law is a minister and we popped in for a day to visit him. That's my only experience.
Oh,
It was not my
great.
space. Yeah.
Great.
But sometimes, like when you get a bunch of pastors in a room, sometimes there are some really incredible conversations that happen when we're comfortable and we've got something really good to talk about, and you get like, I don't know, because they just don't happen in church very often because lay people, like there are some really well-read and amazingly biblically literate lay people. And I'm not saying there aren't, but more often, like most people, like the Bible knowledge isn't going to be the same level as sort of a pastor because we've got more time to put into it, and it's our job.
And a 4-year degree.
Yeah, and avoid degree. So you'd hope it'd be better. And some, have masters and PhDs and all that kind of thing. So it's not only just like knowledge, but even like the questions we ask too of each other.
It's also the shared experience as well, I think,
Yeah.
that relatability, similar contexts.
Yeah, and so getting a chance to sit down and have those sort of conversations and then just hit record. Like, I think there was a complaint a while ago that we sort of have too many pastors on the podcast, but that was kind of where we're coming from, like these are the experts in the theological field. Of course, that's what we're going to have. That's what we are. Like, that's what we connect to as well in a way.
I recall being at college in Cafe Rejuve before they kind of gutted it and redesigned it. And you know how you'd walk in and just immediately to your right, there was the couch that was against the wall with the coffee table in front of it.
Yep.
I'd often sit there with a few of my classmates and we'd just have these like rich conversations. Rich, Jesse, rich conversations.
Rich.
And it was that kind of experience like, this should have been recorded. Like, why is there no one recording these type of conversations? And
well, now there is.
Well, now there was.
Well, there was.
Hey, it still is.
Hiatus.
We're still around. It's just a break.
You can
It's
still listen to everything.
We were on a
The
break.
episodes are not going anywhere. Well, I think you have to be a really deep thinker to become a pastor as well. So there's definitely a type of brain that you're meeting with when multiple pastors get together. Sometimes.
I think you have to be a good.
Have you met Jesse?
Oh, brutal. Jesse's a deep thinker. Now you're just being mean.
I was
Yes,
going
I
to
am.
say, you have to be a good talker to be a pastor. Definitely.
Well,
Well,
yes, there's
maybe.
that.
yeah. There's definitely a lot of processing of ideas and that sort of thing, and a lot of, how do you word it? It's not like thinking about things that aren't necessarily always practical. There's a word I'm looking for. I don't know. But it's like toying with those
Like
ideas a lot.
Theorizing?
Yeah,
Ethereal?
maybe ethereal is a good word. Yeah, theoretical. Like, there's a lot of that kind of, like, because we're talking about God, it's not always necessarily like when you talk about ministry, it's, it's a lot more hands-on that we see. When you're talking about like theology and your idea of God, there are practical outcomes to it, but the actual ideas themselves, they just take a lot of pondering. Yeah, and a lot of processing and a conversation and that kind of thing. And when you get to the end, you might have a different picture of God, but it might not necessarily change things drastically for you. I don't know. Yeah.
Laura, for you, obviously the non-pastor of this group, hearing the pastor conversation that's just happened and that the kind of, even with the criticism, you're a bit too theological at times or too pastory. How have you as because you're not just on the podcast as a presenter or guest, you're on the team, you're also an active listener. How have you found that conversation, kind of an insight into a pastor's mind?
Do you mean as in listening to so many pastors in my ears
No,
for 3
just
years?
Burn the Haystack.
Yeah, in Burn the Haystack, I mean. I think it's good in what you were saying about how when multiple pastors gather and you all have that like deep-seated knowledge of the Bible and understanding of concepts and theology and willing to discuss ideas, I think often as a lay person myself, I don't have the 4-year degree. I don't necessarily have those kind of deep thinkers as my colleagues in a like deep thinking theology. So I haven't had to go through the same maybe wrestling of the ideas and concepts like you guys have. Like, it is easier for me, like I said, with the Sunday law, where I was like, oh, that's uncomfortable and I don't know I fully believe that. Avoid. And the 3 of you, I'm assuming, when you had come across the same problem, you would come across this uncomfortable thing and go, oh, this is hard to believe, or this makes me feel like it changes my idea of God too much. Can I, you can't just do the avoid and run away and think about something else thing like I do. So I have found it helpful. It's definitely opened my eyes and ears to a lot of new concepts and different ways of seeing things. So I did find it helpful to have other voices on, like people who are also lay people, so that it wasn't like just a pastor's club. But in terms of the theological understandings, it was so beneficial to hear those deep thinkers who have wrestled discuss with each other. So I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Well, I think too, like, it's not, a local church often wouldn't get more than one pastor in the room. Well, our local Adventist church anyway. So a chance for these conversations. to be heard. Like they could happen in local churches, but we don't really make a way for it unless it's like a Saturday afternoon or a Friday night sort of thing. But most of the time I don't know.
That's a good point.
It's not that common.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something about podcasting as well is very, like I want to say intimate. But, when I have these headphones on, the clear microphones, it's like I'm part of the small conversation of just the 2 or 3 people. Whereas it's different to like a panel discussion up the front of the church on a Saturday afternoon where you had a big lunch and trying not to nod off. So it's very different.
That's true. Podcasting is quite democratic in that way. It's like we're not talking down to you as the listener. We're wanting to engage with you in this conversation, which is.
Are you saying, Jesse, that the preaching time at church is more of a talking down to you as the listener?
Well, if you're on a stage, then you are literally talking down to people.
Physically.
As for the actual psychological talking down to you, I'll just have to leave that with the pastors.
Of which you are one.
Shut up. I get that though. I do get that in some ways. It's like, I'm kind of like sharing this information that people don't know, but on the other hand, I don't know. Do I feel like I'm up to the task of relaying this information? Am I the only person?
Even more for different cultures, there is that talking down to, because it's like the pastor is up on this pedestal type of thing, and they are the authority. But the challenge is, there are a lot of members in our churches that have been good students of the Bible for longer than any of us have been alive. And so in some respects, their theological understanding is even better than pastors who might have a 4-year degree because they've wrestled with it for 50 or 60 years.
Mm.
Yep. 100%. Yep. Oi. Crazy. Crazy.
Yeah.
Any other things? Because we are past the 1 hour mark, so we should start to wrap up. But any other reflections? Yes.
Laura's back at school. I've got my hand up.
My hand is up. Okay. So I have 2 quick episodes that I really want to give honorable mentions to. Firstly, exploring an ex-Adventist community. Great episode, also really funny. But going back to what we're talking about the idea of othering certain groups. And I think the ex-Adventist community comes under that capital O, other, dangerous. And so important to deconstruct that idea of other equals dangerous, because those people are just like us. And I think we found really, like, when you read out the questions, we related to a lot of the things that they said from their childhoods that were maybe a bit wacky and they were not sure
how to process. And the thing is, 1 or 2 of those actually reached out and sent us an email, and then
they followed us on Instagram.
The Burn the Haystack podcast onto that ex-Adventist thread on Reddit, did they not?
Which was
they linked the episode on there.
Yeah.
Fascinating thread to read.
So funny.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. The guy who summarized it and broke it down for the Reddit, like the TLDR, was quite funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, but it was great to me to listen to that episode, have a laugh, connect, resonate with some of those people's experience, and also really feel for them and how hard it must have been to deconstruct and get away from sometimes quite toxic cultures. And then also to have them connect with us and be like, oh, hey, new friends, without being like, we're ministering to the fallen. It was none of that. We don't hope to convert any of those people. It's just kind of like, friends, let's chat. We've got things in common. That was cool. And the other honorable insight is, honorable mention is the How to Incite an Insurrection in Your Local Church series, which is a 3-part. It was really practical, and I think it came after quite a few episodes of really big conceptual theology stuff. And then we were like, by the way, sit up the front of church. It helps. So I loved that, bringing it back to the practical, what the layperson could do to get involved and make your church culture a happy and healthy place to be. I found that helpful, and I think we got a lot of good feedback for that series.
What I really would love from that series in particular, I would love if there's anybody who's actually gone out and tried all the steps to see what's happened. So I don't know if there's anybody out there who,
because the challenge was that it would take at least 6 months, if not a year or two to see the results of sitting at the front of church, going to business meetings and those sorts of things. It can't just be a one time and everything's grand.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It
So
would be interesting to hear from those people. If you've done it, send us a message, join the Facebook group.
yeah, absolutely.
We want to hear from you.
Tell us what your first business meeting was like. That's always a fun story.
We should find someone who's done it, or get someone to do it and follow all of the steps and then interview them on a 2021
So even though Burn the
special
Haystack is going
episode.
on hiatus, there's already 2 episodes planned for next year, which is,
we can't help ourselves.
redesigning the church kind of 21st century option, and then someone who's incited an insurrection. So you've almost guaranteed 2 episodes of Burn the Haystack in 2021.
Dang.
We haven't guaranteed anything. I'm just
I said almost.
excited.
Almost. They are good ideas, though. They're very tempting
Almost.
to come back for.
Yeah.
Almost
Very
guaranteed, people. Almost.
Almost.
Any other
But yeah, those are my honorable mentions. So
yeah.
your
Does
turn.
anybody else have any honorable mentions?
I just think Tim Gillespie is a gift to the church, especially for pastors. The episodes that he featured on, he had 3 of them. I went to say 3 with 2 fingers, but 3 of them.
One, two,
So
three.
there was the Tim and Sam and Tim episode, which was again more recent, and then way back, he featured on 2 episodes talking about the One Project and daring to think bigger. That was a good episode, but I really appreciated the next one, which was the future of Adventism, and looking at things that we can change structurally and conceptually within the local church. Again, Laura, bringing it back to the practical, that can really help the church just be the church, the kingdom that God needs us to be.
But also, he also brought into his conceptual restructuring ideas, which this episode blew my mind. It was one of our earliest ones, and he talked about the finance and admin structure of our entire global church, and how that could be rearranged to benefit the local church situation. Anyway, fascinating.
Yeah, there's been a few episodes of Burn the Haystack. Most, I don't know. No, actually, there's been quite a lot. They really do send
100
waves.
and how many?
No, but I mean, there's been some particular episodes that have a lot of impact. And I think the Tim Gillespie one, the first one, that was the first time we experienced whoa, this podcast can actually have impact on the church. We had people from very high positions in conferences and divisions and stuff that we have nothing to do with reaching out and talking about it. And we were like, what have we done? It was good. But it was really weird. These 2 random, I think we were interns at the time in New Zealand. You know what I mean? It's not a
Babies.
You're at the
really,
bottom of the organizational structure.
Yeah. And
Totally.
New Zealand, North New Zealand conference, it's an amazing conference. I love it. But you wouldn't say it's one of the most influential conferences on the Adventism global scale or whatever. It's, I don't know, yeah.
Especially in terms of size, it's probably a blip compared to some in South America or Africa, where there are some massive conferences
We have
population-wise.
11,000 Adventists in North New Zealand, which there are some Adventist churches in the world that have that as just their membership. So
Yeah. Wow.
True. So it's pretty that was a real wake up call to what the potential of a podcast could be in our church. And we have no name, Jesse and I, we're not famous Adventist preachers or writers or anything like that. So it was really 2 nobodies.
Well, you weren't.
I still wouldn't say we're not. Still wouldn't say we're I don't
Right.
know, you think of someone if Doug Batchelor started a podcast, instantly thousands of listeners
Yeah, that's
probably or
true.
whatever.
Yeah.
And Sam Lenore and Tim Gillespie, when they started their podcast, it was just instantly a whole lot of people caught on, and they're awesome. I'm not saying they shouldn't have, but I'm just saying we didn't have any clout or whatever to start a podcast. So that's why it was crazy to me, just the power of a good podcast episode that speaks to a particular culture well. And we've had a number of episodes like that since. But yeah, I guess it's just been really crazy to just see this sort of journey. And I don't know if we'll ever know the sort of impact we've had on parts of the church. But there's definitely been something. I don't know.
And it's been awesome to have all those guests on as well. Like, I think of like watching our download graph, rise. And I think when we first, in that first season, had Tim Gillespie, we sort of was like, woo, lots of downloads from that. It still gets heaps of downloads. And then a little while later, we had Nimrod. That was a fantastic episode. That's also in my top 10. And that shot up the downloads as well. And then Chantel Smith, when she left, she quit being an Adventist pastor for a time, and then that shot up as well. And it was just like the generosity of the guests to just join the podcast and have a chat, even when it was really small, or even if they weren't sure how the chat was going to go. Like Andre mentioned, he was nervous to come on for ages, and just the generosity of those big thinkers to maybe step outside their comfort zone, join the discussion.
But even, the generosity of people like, say, Chris Oberg, to step into a podcast in Australia, New Zealand. The generosity of Kira Bullock to come and speak about the gift of singleness. Like, that's such a personal topic, but the willingness to share that as kind of a hope to others.
Yeah,
amazing.
Some amazing people, honestly. And I think I guess another like last thought that I wanted to share that I think has been really cool with the podcast is that most, not even just Adventist media, I would say most Christian media, the idea is that we say something and you believe it and take it on board straight away. But I think we've really built a culture with Burn the Haystack that you should ask questions, and just because we have somebody on and say something, it's, well, what do you think about it? Like, do you think that's the way it is? Do you think we're wrong, right? Like, all that sort of stuff. I really appreciated like conversations I've had with people about that, and just saying to them straight away, like, you don't have to agree with any of the guests or anything Jesse and I say on the podcast. You are free to disagree. And they're like, oh yeah, true. Yeah, well, I disagree. I'm like, well, you have to have a reason why. I'm like, oh yeah, true. I'll figure that out. That kind of thing. But just giving people that power to just say, I disagree, and work it out. Or like, I've never thought about that. I actually do agree with that. I don't know. Like, for me, that's really exciting to make a culture around that. It feels like something that the church has been missing.
Feels like emotional health. Yeah. No, very cool. Very cool. Well, hey, are there any other last reflections? I know we've spent a lot of time reminiscing this episode, which has been lovely. This is kind of the last one for a little while. So any final reflections and thoughts from you guys? And apart from that, we'll throw it to the rest of our audience.
I just want to say thank you so much, Josh and Jesse. Well, I know that Josh Wood and I are on the team, but you guys have carried the lion's share and had all those really tough conversations and often faced the feedback, both positive and negative. You guys are awesome. And also a huge thank you to everyone that, like I said, was brave enough to come on as a guest and contribute to the show. Because it's been like a team effort, and the conversations, I think, have grown so many people's faith and allowed us to discuss things and realize that if we come to a different conclusion of our understanding of who God is than the person sitting in the pew next to us, doesn't mean we have to leave, and doesn't mean we have to give up on believing in a loving God that cares for us. So that is
a huge thank you to the social media audience who engage in various ways. We've got the Facebook community, we've got the Instagram page where people may just like, they might comment, they might vote in a poll.
They love a poll.
But it's just been so much. And a lot of the episodes, especially probably over the last 18 months, a lot of the episode topics, and they're not just Josh and Jesse thought of, they're listener requested.
Yes.
And that's, I think, been part of the success of the longevity and the success of Burn the Haystack over the last 3 years.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. It's been awesome to feel like we're not just plugging along at this on our own. So thank you, Laura and Josh Wood, for everything that you've done to help us, and you have. And it's been immensely richer because of your contribution over the last couple years of the
Rich.
podcast.
Rich.
So rich.
I
So
can't
rich.
guarantee. Unfortunately, none of us are richer because of
No.
the podcast.
Absolutely not.
Buy
Richer
more
in, the,
t-shirts. No.
richer in the way of yeah, buy t-shirts. No, richer in the way that like a good chocolate cake is richer than
Amen.
not in the way of like I'm financially wealthy, unfortunately. Yeah.
Great analogy, Laura.
Great. Perfect.
And
with
as well.
that,
as well as that, yes. Just to reiterate Josh Wood's thoughts, thank you for everybody who came onto our podcast the last 3 years for being a guest. Big thank you to our recurring guests, people who didn't just say yes once but twice, some of them 3 times, which is pretty unbelievable. And to every single person who's been with us through this journey, our dear listeners, stealing that shamelessly from Tim and Sam and Tim, and everybody who's been part of the community and building this cool thing. And I don't know, I'm just very excited to see where this goes next.
Yeah.
me too.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. You're all awesome. Make sure you go check out the website and all that good stuff. You know what to do. All right, that is Josh, Jesse, and Laura out.